Welcome back. We are the Brothers Mahoney. This is Michael.
And I am James.
And today we are discussing Day of the Daleks, which was written by Louis Marks, who is the same guy who wrote Masque of Mandragora, among some other Doctor Who stories. And it aired as a 4-part story in January 1972, which opened season 9 of the classic Doctor Who series.
And that's interesting because we actually watched the Masque of Mandragora and we've talked about that as well. And neither you or I were out that there were some interesting things about it, but on the whole, neither of us really laughed that one out that much. And I believe that's actually the only Tom Baker thing we've talked about so far.
And yeah, Day of the Daleks is a story we've only seen once before. I mean, it's just one of the many Dalek stories in Classic Who. It's not like I had a deep interest in rewatching, but I'm happy I got to revisit it. And let me just read the plot from the back of the DVD copy. On Earth in the 22nd century, Daleks have enslaved the planet, and humans live in fear of their masters. Meanwhile, back in the 20th century, a peace conference is urgently needed to prevent World War III. When reports reach unit of a ghost at Ardgley House, the site for the conference, the Doctor and Joe decide to investigate. Danger is waiting for them there, including a trip 200 years into the future without the TARDIS. And naturally, it's without the TARDIS because this is during the time in which the Third Doctor was stranded on Earth.
Yeah, and basically he was in exile.
It's also worth mentioning that naturally, being the Third Doctor, it's Jon Pertwee with Joe, Katy Manning, and we also have Lethbridge-Stewart here, played by Nicholas Courtney, Mike Yates, played by Richard Franklin, and Sergeant Benton, played by Jon Levene, all three of which are, I would say, moderately important characters. To be honest, to this day, I can't swear I could tell Yates and Benton apart.
But I think you could if you looked at them. I wouldn't be able to pick Yates out of a lineup, but I'll be able to pick Benton out at least. So I'll be able to tell them apart, even if you couldn't. So I'll help you out.
One of the interesting things about this story is that it actually opens with the Doctor attempting to override the TARDIS controls.
Yeah, he's getting a bit tired of being stuck on Earth, as usual.
I mean, at this point, it's been, 2 seasons with him on Earth?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right. So yeah, he's trying to override the TARDIS controls because he wants some freedom up in this.
And of course, the only thing he manages to do is part of the episode because we see this strange bit that never comes up again, except maybe as a reference that the Doctor mentions to Joe, of the Doctor and Joe seeing themselves about 2 minutes in the future. And then I think the TARDIS does a very small explosion, and then they just go on with the rest of the day.
Yeah, it was sort of a weird scene that just had no relevance to anything, and like James said, it wasn't really brought up again. It's not like it took a lot of time out of the story, but that type of, I don't know, padding type stuff,
lollygagging.
Yeah, it's not uncommon in Classic Who. That said, it's still preferable to ration everything. Check out the discussion we had in the long game to find out more.
Yeah, well, you should watch that anyway because the long game is fascinating. But anyway, back to this one.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that, I'm not sure of the dates. So I know that when this story was initially released, some people weren't necessarily impressed with some of the special effects, and there are elements of the story which do seem a bit weak, such as the voices of the Daleks. And there's actually, and we have it on the DVD copy, there was a sort of special edition released, which I guess they must have just updated the special effects. It says, quote, brand new effects and new Dalek voices exclusive to this DVD. Now, when we first watched this some years ago, we watched just the original airing version, and we did the same this time around, mainly because there's a lot of Classic Who that may not have the best effects, and I guess to me it just seems unnecessary. It's like watching a black and white movie in color.
Yeah, we prefer to stay with as close to the original as possible, and that's not always easy, and maybe means that, I mean, I don't know, I don't think I enjoyed any last just because of the Dalek voices. And to be fair, they were noticeably a bit weaker than the previous Dalek voices. But it bears mentioning that this was the first appearance of the Daleks since Patrick Troughton's first season. The Evil of the Daleks, which neither Michael nor I have seen yet, was the Daleks' last appearance. And it's been, 5 seasons since then? Around there? Maybe just four.
I had an okay time at Day of the Daleks. I think it's one of those stories, and I guess to clarify, it's just a 4-part story, just 4 episodes. I think the first 2 are okay, but nothing particularly great. But I do think things pick up nicely in the last 2 episodes.
I was pretty bored with the first 2 episodes on the whole. Now, I have to admit, I don't remember which episode had the Doctor kicking and attacking one of the... Well, I guess you don't want to get too into it yet before we talk about the plot, but there was a fight scene. It's Jon Pertwee. There was going to be a fight scene. Oh, to be fair, there were multiple. Where the Doctor, who is drinking a glass of wine, and actually drinking wine, not doing a Matt Smith thing where he just spits it out. He's actually drinking the wine. There's somebody who walks into a room, and the Doctor just karate chops him. And then he does a goddamn band one-liner. Oh, I am hoping I didn't hurt you, or something to that effect. And then he just takes another sip of wine.
Yeah, he's looking quite suave and debonair. And I think that segment in the first couple of episodes when he's just at the quote-unquote haunted house, I think that's sort of... it's probably one of the things that's more potential than they actually show. But that's not really the focus either. That's just, I guess, the
setup.
Yeah, the starting point to the story.
I can completely believe Jon Pertwee stuck there. Or just sit around for hours in a house waiting for anything to happen.
Yeah, that sounds on point.
Because he's the type of scientist like Doctor who would span that time. I don't think Matt Smith's would.
Oh yeah, I have to imagine Matt Smith's Doctor would get bored. Actually, I think a lot of modern Doctors would get bored.
Yeah, it depends how focused Tennant was, but that's probably true. I guess Matt Smith must be on my mind. That's my second Matt Smith reference already. It reminds me actually a bit. I've read the first 50 or so, maybe 100 pages of a adaptation of the radio The Ghosts of Space, which is actually a Jon Pertwee novel/radio play. And this reminded me in some aspects a lot of that, because in that there's a haunted house that the Doctor is investigating without going into the specifics. So it reminded me a bit of that. Only that had Sarah Jane, I believe, not Joe.
Yeah, and the basis of the story is that at this haunted house, there's supposed to be a peace conference. I'm not sure if it really gets into specifics. We just know that the, quote, international situation has grown worse.
Yeah, I think there was it The Mind of Evil? I feel like there's a reference to some international crisis in one of the previous stories. I think it might have been The Mind of Evil, but I don't recall.
This peace conference is supposed to be sort of put together by a Sir Reginald Stiles, which is a nice old-fashioned British name.
Yeah, it sounds completely British.
Yeah. And what's worth mentioning, actually, is I believe I can't swear it opens this way, but one of the early scenes in the show is Reginald Stiles just at the house doing whatever thing he's doing. Maybe he's enjoying a nightly drink. Nice nightcap, who's to say. But he sort of gets attacked by this guerrilla soldier type guy who just sort of pops in, attempts to kill him, and sort of disappears. And that always amused me because whenever I see that, and to be fair, I've only seen it like twice, but I'm always reminded of the beginning of the second X-Men movie, X2, where it looks like Nightcrawler and their mind controllers attempting to assassinate the president of the US. And it always strikes me that this is like the first very low budget attempt to do the same type of thing. This is in the early stages. And
the very early stages.
I mean, it's rough, but it's the same exact idea. And it's because that this guy sort of disappears after the attempt that people, or at least some people, seem to think this house is haunted.
Yeah, you can certainly see why that would poke the Doctor's interest up. Plus, it's a peace conference that's really important. So a unit is apparently providing security, which is something that they do, which I also find fascinating.
Yeah, apparently for some reason, people from the, I think it's 22nd century are trying to come back to this time to kill Rachnos Tyros, who's doing a peace conference, and it gets into, I'm not sure if it's necessarily a mystery or if it's just information we just don't know yet. But it's sort of an interesting, I guess, backstory as to why they're doing this, and we find out more in later episodes. Because, as you can imagine, over the course of the story, Joe accidentally gets sent to the future, and then the Doctor follows after, and we find out all about what's going on in the 22nd century as the plot said, when Daleks have enslaved the planet. And yeah, that's pretty fun times.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd like to be on a planet enslaved by Daleks, and I certainly wouldn't want to be on the one that we saw in this story.
Yeah, it does, though, lead to what I think is the story's strongest point. Naturally, the Daleks control the planet, but when Jo first gets teleported there, I don't even know when she first runs into the Daleks. It's probably, I imagine it's after the Doctor gets there. But point being, she meets a human guy who's just known as tied to sort of the controller, who's sort of like an overseer type guy. And he's played by Aubrey Woods, which I don't know if he's necessarily a big name. I can't say one way or the other. I honestly don't know. I don't know much about 70s British actors. But he is the guy who played the candy shop guy in a Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, naturally the classic 70s movie, and who sings, I think it's just Candyman Cano. I don't know what the actual title of the song is, but that's who Aubrey Woods is.
And he was recognizable to me. That I was looking at the face, and I didn't look up until 3 episodes in because I wanted to try to get it myself, and it just wasn't come to me who this face was.
Yeah, and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is a movie. It's one of those movies that we've seen multiple times, but who can say when we first saw it? I have absolutely no idea. Like, it's sort of a movie that was on the periphery of our childhood. We definitely saw it. I have no idea how young we would have been when we saw it. And it's a movie, at least I've seen multiple times. So it's just a face that I sort of know. It's like if I happen to see the face of the teacher from that movie. Oh, I can't do that. Let's say you got 200. I probably recognize that guy's face, but it's a situation where it's really the only thing we know from that guy. So it's just sort of random to see someone from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory pop up in a really interesting role in this story.
Yeah, it's a very... I'll give them credit. They did really well with this writing. I guess that would be Louis Marks. Maybe he wrote the... I don't know if he had any help. But the writing for this character is so interesting. It goes a place you wouldn't expect it to go in terms of how you're supposed to sympathize. It's very 70s political, the story as a whole.
We've mentioned before that Doctor Who, especially classic Doctor Who, was often quite political at times, and this is a perfect example of that. Because the third, fourth episodes are pretty much entirely politics. I mean, there's some fighting and battles such as they are in the 70s low-budget way. But the crux of the division between the controller, who's sort of working with the Daleks, well, I guess working under the Daleks, not really working with the Daleks. As the Daleks say, the function of the human is to obey.
The Daleks did have some pretty banger quotes in this story, even with the weaker voices.
Yeah, I believe they also had the hit, "Do not dispute with the Daleks."
So apparently, even if a Dalek's wrong, you're just not supposed to dispute with them. You're just supposed to let them be. Of course, I guess in their point of view, they could never be wrong.
But yeah, Aubrey Woods as the controller, I think, was sort of the standout. Like, the story, I thought was decent. Naturally, it's fun to see characters like the Doctor, like Joe. But the real standout in this one to me was Aubrey Woods, which I thought added, I don't say added a lot, but he was a definite shining point in the story.
You know, he really was. I think he was one of the more fascinating characters I've seen in Classic Who, just because he's working for the Daleks to be basically, I don't want to say fascist, because, I mean, it's kind of fascisty. And overseer, they have people working in, I think it might have been mines. Point is, they have people working, doing all this menial labor. He's not there directly.
Under like slave labor. It's not like they're getting paid. It's not like they're
I did
clocking
expect.
any
I did,
day.
to be fair, I didn't expect anybody to think the Daleks are paying anybody. And he's basically, I think he ran a whole Saxon. I don't think we knew how big a Saxon was, but they have all these controllers all over, I'd assume the Warlord, and they're mining these materials and they're sending it back to Skaro, which is apparently a thing right now. And he's just a human. Apparently his family has been the controller of this Saxon for the last, 200 years or so, because this Warlord that the Daleks are running came about because of the peace conference, the same one that we see being set up early on in the current day in this story. There was an explosion at. Some bomb went off, everyone died, and that's how did a world war. And ever since then, in the destruction of the planet, the Daleks swooped in and took over. So it's pretty convenient.
Yeah, and the Daleks are sort of behind the scenes. I mean, I have to imagine most of the humans know about them. But when Jo gets to the future, she doesn't see any Daleks. She just sees the controller, who's acting out polite. He's a perfectly pleasant man to Jo, tries to treat her with courtesy. And sort of what seem to be brutish security guards would be the Argrans.
Yeah, these were interesting. Maybe questionable because it's unclear how intelligent they are. I mean, they're a whole species. You'd think they would have some intelligence, but they're just used seemingly as mindless beasts, basically. And I don't mean to insult their culture, but we never got to see much of them. Maybe these were, I don't know, maybe these certain ones were brought by the Daleks just to provide security. You would think Daleks need security, but I guess that they wanted to remain a bit low profile. Maybe there aren't even all that many Daleks. Well, I guess due to how many Dalek props they had, of course there weren't all that many here right now. But in universe, maybe they were just I don't know, maybe they're just like trendy Daleks in this area because they just left it to the controllers and the Orgrans to deal with. I don't know.
And yeah, and they might not even be worth that much of a mention, but they do actually, the Orgrans, they do actually pop up again in another Jon Pertwee story.
Yeah, and I believe there's even an audio story Planet of the Orgrans for Big Finish, but really that's not a surprise to anyone.
Yeah, so it's the first appearance of this, I would say, pretty forgotten species.
Forgotten and forgettable.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It's not like they bring a lot to the table. It's not like we're missing a lot, but the Doctor does kill one with a gun in this story just to show you that's not your daddy's Doctor. Actually, it probably is your daddy's Doctor, but it may not be the Doctor that you're familiar with.
Yeah, it is James Bond in Doctor form, which is kind of interesting because I don't know how confirmed it is, but maybe it's completely true. I don't remember the specifics. I have heard that Jon Pertwee is kind of the basis for James Bond in the very first place, so take that as you will. I think he was friends with Ian Fleming, the one who wrote the James Bond books.
So it all comes full circle.
It kind of does.
And it's not just a first for the, well, I guess it is a first for the Orgrans, but we also have the first reference to the Blinovitch limitation effect.
The Blinovitch limitation effect, and I'm just going to read this straight from the TARDIS wiki just because I'm not great at summarizing, especially when it's confusing time travel stuff, was a natural function of the universe that described the effects of approaching and or making physical or casual contact with a future or past version of yourself. An action that was also referenced as crossing your own timeline. Basically, it's when you as person A come into contact with you, but maybe you 5 minutes from the past. And of course, it's time traveling, so you could do that. And if you touch, things begin to happen. What those things are temporal paradoxes. And what that becomes in Father's Day are these hideous CGI Reaper things.
Oh, I was going to call them dashing. These dashing lads.
They could be dashing to some, I suppose. I think they blew all the bats on the second episode in the season.
Yeah, the Blinovitch limitation effect, I'm not sure how big of an impact it really plays in this story.
I think it was just named just by the Doctor.
Yeah, I think it was too. I think the story basis was around this scientific, what do you even call it, like a theory?
I guess it would be I don't know, scientific fact of the universe as the Time Lords understand it. I think he brings it up to the fact Joe asks him, "Oh, if you fail at this," I forget whether this was, that's the problem. "If you fail at this, then why can't you just go back and try again? You can time travel." And he says, "No, actually, you can't do it that way because of the Blinovitch limitation effect. You can't just go back and keep trying." And we see what happens actually in Father's Day exactly when they try to go back and do it again, because there's multiple versions of a time traveler there, and that causes all types of problems.
That has indeed been my experience with time travel also.
I didn't know you had experience with time travel, but I guess I learned something every day.
I'm a deep guy. I have layers.
Layers you might have. This story had many questionable parts in it. Not bad, but questionable. So, as everyone knows, how episodes end is something happens, maybe a cliffhanger, usually a cliffhanger. Either way, something happens, then the music comes in, and it goes to the credits, all nice and smooth. And then the next episode picks up, it shows that scene, and it continues on. Except in, what was it that we watched? Where it showed a bit extra, and it was actually refilmed. I forget which one that was.
Yeah, I'm blanking.
I'm blanking too, but there was one we watched where it actually refilmed those scenes, because I noticed that they used different lines, which I mean, it's sort of just been exactly what we had seen before, and I forget which one that was. But either way, so episodes 2 and 3 at the very least, probably 4, I don't remember. They do that normal Doctor Who thing. They replay the scenes that the last episode ended on, and then the music kicks in for a second. As though they literally cut and pasted from the end of the previous episode and didn't even take the music out. It does just take around for too long. It's not like it goes into the whole theme, because the theme's already played. It's not like these are new Doctor Who cold opens, well, when we had cold opens. It was just the music had played, then it shows this scene that we've already seen, and then the music starts playing again for a second. It was so amateur, and it was so noticeable.
Yeah, it's sort of striking because, like James said, the transition between the previous episode's material and the cliffhanger usually, as you would expect, just sort of seamlessly goes into the new material, and that's not really what happens here. It really stands out because I'm not sure how that type of thing happens. Like, I'm not sure what you have to do to get that. Like James said, it sort of does really feel like a copy and paste situation.
Yeah, and I understand that back then, they didn't exactly get the time to make all of this work perfectly. I'm surprised we got as many good stories as we did with the type of time restrictions they were under. But this is one of the more amateur things I've seen from them. It's also fun to note that this, of course, takes place on 22nd century Earth, which is about 200 years in the future, give or take, I think they said. From 1970 to 1971, I forget. And one of the things I find fascinating is what the universe of Doctor Who actually looks like, including the timelines of not only the Doctor, but the people who the Doctor meets, including the Daleks. Now, the worst thing about the Daleks is we see in this story they have time travel. So much like the Doctor, the Daleks' personal timeline is all over the place. This story takes place after the Dalek invasion of Earth, where of course we already said the Daleks had invaded Earth. Now I forget what time period that took place on in Earth history, but for the Daleks at least, this takes place after that, which is reasonable. That was a First Doctor story. This is a Third Doctor story. But this takes place, according to the TARDIS wiki, they have a Dalek timeline, and woe betide anybody who tried to take the time to figure that out. I know it wasn't my original research into this. It takes place after later Third Doctor Dalek stories, Frontier in Space and Planet of the Daleks, which we will talk about in due time. I believe out both of those 6-episode stories.
Yeah, and they when they came out in the same DVD. It's like the Dalek. What was it called? The Dalek?
Yeah, I think it's just called Dalek War. In the US, that was the DVD set name.
Yeah, so both Planet of the Daleks and Frontier in Space came out same DVD. Both stories are 6 episodes, and boy, it takes some time to get through those.
I actually quite like Frontier in Space a lot. Well, I like it more than Planet of the Daleks, but we'll talk about that when we talk about that. So it takes place after those, which is already a bit wonky because, of course, we see those later. I think those are maybe the next season for Jon Pertwee. But also, Daleks have time travel in this, but apparently they're kind of new to having time travel because this, according to the TARDIS Wiki, takes place before the chase, which was a First Doctor story. I think it was story number 16. Don't ask me why, I just remember the story number. In which we see the Daleks have time travel, in which we don't see Ian enjoying the Beatles because they copyrighted that on the DVD we have.
Yeah, the chase is another story I sort of look forward to talking about because there might
we'll
be
talk about it.
there'll be some fighting in wars, some tense times.
I don't know how tense it will be, but besides episode 5 and 6, I didn't really like that much.
But we'll talk about that at some point, probably. Who's to say?
We will.
But I do find it interesting that technically through the Daleks' perspective, or the perspective of the Dalek species as a whole, this story, Day of the Daleks, a Third Doctor story, takes place before the chase. I think that type of thing is quite interesting. And watching it, I have to imagine most people watching it at the time, like if you were watching this in the 60s and 70s, probably did it connect to that. It's probably not particularly easy to see.
I wonder, I don't know how to phrase this, I wonder when it'll be possible to see, because sometimes when it comes to timeline constructions, it's not even possible to see where something should go until, I don't know, 20 years later, when you learn more.
Yeah, it just sort of, when you get to time travel type thing, it's just always going to be complicated like this. And when you have like a time traveler like the Doctor running into a species that can time travel, woe betide you trying to figure anything out.
But that does not stop die-hard fans from trying, and bless anybody who does.
And it doesn't stop last die-hard fans like us from telling others what they found.
Yeah, well, it's a service you provide here at the Brothers Mahoney.
There is one scene I did want to mention briefly in which after the Doctor gets to the 22nd century, he's caught by these fascist type people. Now it's off screen, but he was clearly beaten and tortured because he's looking a bit disheveled. And he gets sent to a detention facility, and that's always a nice euphemism, a detention facility. But he gets interrogated by a character just called the Manager, which is, I guess, a level or two below a controller. Now, the whole reason he's being interrogated is because, we mentioned earlier, there's sort of a resistance guerrilla force on Earth who are trying to fight against the Daleks, and they're trying to send people back in time to prevent Rajna's tires from blowing up the peace conference, because that is what they believe to have happened. That's what I guess history has said about the peace conference. So the Doctor, when he came to the 22nd century, naturally I think he did come with the resistance, and then he got separated later on because that's just how it be. I do remember his attempted getaway did not work out at all.
No, it did not. But he did try, and that's what matters.
So he's being interrogated by the Manager, who is played by Peter Hill, and he only gets, I think, the one scene, or maybe it might be more sequence. It might technically be a couple scenes, but he really gets.
They might have set him up in a previous episode, just a little bit.
Yeah, that's true too. But he doesn't get that much focus whatsoever. He's a character that's quite a bit of fun with what little time he gets. And part of the additional fun to the last couple of episodes is just almost the political debates between the Controller and the Doctor. Because this is an exact quote from the Doctor when he's talking to the Controller. When I meet a regime that needs to import savage alien life forms as security guards, I begin to wonder who the real criminals are. And the funny thing is, the Controller's been all nice and gentlemanly to Jo, and then he has to deal with the Doctor. The Doctor is not a cuddly cat.
And it's funny because, as Michael said earlier, Jo's just been here. She hasn't been allowed to leave, but the Controller has been a perfect host to Jo on the whole. Of course, he's not telling her everything, but she's getting along quite fine. And then the Doctor comes in, and on the whole, he's pretty rude, but to be fair, as he housed the controller, he had just been tortured. And the controller tries to wave it away. Oh, I'm sorry for that unfortunate incident, Doctor. Because, of course, he wants to stay on the Doctor's good side, too. But that does not work out, and considering this Doctor's personality, that never was going to work out.
Yeah, and it's also just a matter of fact that the two of them have significantly different viewpoints. Because this guy, like James mentioned, he's sort of an underling of the Daleks. He's a human working under the Daleks to sort of
keep humanity under control.
Yeah, keep humanity enslaved. In fact, the Doctor multiple times refers to the controller as a quisling, which is probably quite an archaic term. It may very well have been commonplace, or at least not unheard of, maybe around the UK in the 50s and 60s and 70s. I really don't know. I just know that to the American modern era, quisling is not a term I was particularly familiar with.
No, it's not one I knew either. Maybe it's more common and we just haven't heard it. That's how it's possible.
It's a reference to a politician, Vidkun Quisling, who was a Norwegian politician who collaborated with the Nazis as they occupied Norway. So obviously you can see the correlation. Norwegian guy working with the Nazis to oppress his own people, and this guy, human being, working with the Daleks to oppress his own people. A Quisling he is, from a family of Quislings, as the Doctor says. Not just insulting him, but his peeps.
Well, yeah, because his family's been giving control of this Doctor since the whole event happened and the Daleks came to help humanity rise from despair. Not quite what happened.
And that leads to an element that I think makes the story a lot more enjoyable than you might think if you had just watched the first couple of episodes. Because after the Doctor calls him a quisling, the controller he doesn't lose it, but he sort of snaps back. He's a bite, bruh. He's like, silence. And I'll just do the exact quote just to give it in its glory. You do not understand. Nobody who did not live through those terrible years can understand. Towards the end of the 20th century, a series of wars broke out. There was 100 years of nothing but killing destruction. 7/8 of the world's population was wiped out. The rest were living in holes in the ground, starving, reduced to the level of animals. So you can see the desperate situation that the human race was in. So when the Daleks came by, even though they'd still technically be enslaved, it could theoretically still be, I don't even like to use the word beneficial, but it could still, you could argue it would be a better situation under the Daleks than what they were currently in themselves.
Well, it gets into the whole situation that some slaves in Southern American history were happy to be slaves because it was a better situation for them. But that doesn't mean the institution is okay. And humanity was basically made to work in the mines or work in the factories, unless you were lucky enough to be a controller, in which case you got to just do... Well, to be fair, I guess you had to deal with the Daleks face-to eyes talk. So maybe you would prefer the mines, I don't know.
And from the point of the view of the controller, and like James said, his family has been controllers in the area for, I think, 3 generations. From his point of view, they have helped to make things better for the others. They have gained concessions. Now, I'm not sure what concessions those would be, but they have apparently gained some.
I have a feeling the concessions have to be along the lines of literal physical facts about humans. Maybe getting them more food because they could not work without it.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you see it all the time from aliens. You just expect humans to work non-stop, and when they drop out, they're like, bruh, stop. So I can imagine trying to explain, hey, yeah, humans do need some sleep. Humans do need some food. If you give them some of these minimum basics, maybe they will last longer for you.
And I have a feeling they did get to the 4-day weeks, though. The 4-day work weeks.
Yeah, probably not. But the control's perspective, sort of working with the Daleks was not the only choice, but easily the most sensible choice, because through his perspective, you can't fight the Daleks. It's just pointless. It's not going to work.
You know what this is? He's a social democrat.
Oh, we're getting political up in here.
I mean, to be fair, the revolutionary group we see fighting the Daleks look very similar to the revolutionary groups you would have seen throughout the 70s.
That is true. and the revolutionary groups who exist to this day too.
Yeah, I did actually make the connection before. I made the connection, of course, that he's going along and trying to get what he quote unquote can out of it, and from his perspective, it's the best you can hope for because you can't actually beat the Daleks anyway. Yeah, no, he's the social democrat, and I don't think the organization, the robbers, ever had a name. They were a bit. I guess there were enough of them, but
it seems like a pretty small ragtag type environment.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of them overall, so I guess they didn't need a name. But nonetheless, that's a fun realization that came to me just now.
And actually, the controller isn't just what the kids call a one-trick pony, which is probably not a term most kids use nowadays.
I would expect not.
I would expect not either. But the controller actually has something of a... I mean, it's sort of rudimentary, but he does have something of a character arc in this one, which is #TotsFantastic. Like I said, it's somewhat rudimentary in its stylings, but it's fun. His final scene, I thought, I don't know what to say it, rebranded him a courageous hero, if you even saw him as a particularly bad guy. But I do think it was a really good final scene.
You know, I thought that was a really good stand-up to him as well. Out of everyone we saw in this story, he's one who caught me the most fascinated.
Yeah, because we do get introduced to a couple of members of the guerrilla group. There's like some woman named Anat, which I think it's A-N-A-T, and she is played by Anna Berry. And there's some other members too who get names, and they get plenty of, well, I don't just say plenty, they do get character traits. This one guy was gang-ho about killing his tires and not listening to the doctor, and others are maybe a little more conciliatory. But honestly, none of them really stood out to me that much at all. Whereas the controller actually seemed to have a character. He had a point of view, he had a philosophy, and he actually tried to explain himself where he was coming from. And I think that sort of added a lot to it. It's such a fascinating character in sort of a mid-tier story.
Could you imagine the controller written by Chris Chibnall?
Well, I think it's best not to imagine things written by Chris Chibnall.
Yeah, the nightmare just came to me. Anyway, not to go on about that. Are we ready with the timeline?
Well, I did want to mention one last thing, and this is just a small note, but the Doctor is tortured with a mind analysis machine in this story, which he's probably been tortured by that same thing before. He's probably been tortured by that same machine afterwards. He just doesn't have good luck, guys. And as he's being tortured by this mind analysis machine, and I have to admit, I don't know what the machine actually does, some type of painful psychic thing, but we did see images of both the first and second Doctor, being William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton, for a nice little, I guess, dash of continuity, like, hey guys, just keep in mind this is the same character, even though you haven't seen these guys in 3, 4, 5 years.
And hey, now we're in Carlo.
Oh, that's true too. So yeah, it's just a small thing, but just a nice little continuity note showing the first two Doctors on screen.
You know, I've always appreciated that, and it's even more fun nowadays when they get to show all of them. New Who likes to do that sometimes. Certainly more often than they used to.
Yeah, it's going to be great once we get up to like 55 Doctors and it takes like a minute and a half to go through all the faces. It's going to be sort of ruining the moment.
No, that'll be interesting. But yeah, I actually quite liked the scene just because I appreciate all attempts to say that, yes, all of that still happened. This is still the same character.
Yeah, the only attempt I may not have cared for was Macho Brain and Morbius one.
Well, that was, well, I don't know if it was, but it certainly became controversial.
Yeah, and like I said, we'll hit that when you get to the timeless trend. It's not too far off, guys. Be ready. Now, about that timeline.
Yeah, and as I was saying before, as listeners, if you've listened to us before, know, the TARDIS Wiki has a personal timeline for each Doctor, which we've mentioned previously. They also have that Dalek timeline, including the extensive extended media ranging from comic books, comic strips, Big Finish, and BBC audio, multiple book ranges, and everything in between. Doctor Who canon is a jumbled mess, and it's been a jumbled mess basically since the 60s because of, well, John and Gillian, but we do not need to talk about that. So it's just fun to see where the stories we're discussing fit into the universe as a whole, as continuity and the narrative timeline has always been of interest to me, not just in Doctor Who, but in other forms of media as well. And so this one this Third Doctor story takes place after a comic book story in TV action, which printed, I think they did Saga Doctor stories too. It was, of course, a British weekly magazine comic book that printed multiple stories. It was not a Doctor Who comic. It had tons of stuff in it. But they did print Doctor Who stories, and they did a lot of Jon Pertwee ones. And this took place after the Zeron invasion, which came out in 1972 and 1973, around there. After the Zeron invasion, there is a short story, and we don't usually mention short stories, but this one we actually own. It came out in Short Trips and Side Steps, which was a short story Doctor Who collection by BBC in 2000. And I believe, did Big Finish take over after that one?
Yeah, Big Finish took over after that, which is unfortunate because those are a lot harder to come by.
Yeah, those are super expensive for no godly reason that I can see. But I don't know, maybe we'll hopefully get them. But that story is Countdown to TV Action, which is a nice meta reference, because before TV Action, the Doctor stories were printed in Countdown, was the name of the comic. And right after this is another fascinating thing. We're not going to get into it, but the 1996 Doctor Who novel, Who Killed Kennedy, by David Bishop.
Yeah, and Who Killed Kennedy is a book that, well, I guess once I started looking more into Doctor Who media, it's a book that I've been interested in for a while. We've even mentioned it before, actually, I think. We mentioned it before when we discussed Spirit from Space, because there was a small character in that who actually appeared in and had a plot point in Who Killed Kennedy. And it's a book that I think sounds absolutely fascinating.
It's a book that does a Doctor Light thing. It's to the point of view of somebody looking into the Doctor versus following the Doctor's point of view.
Yeah, same type of thing that you might see in Love and Monsters. So
it is, in fact, very Love and Monsters, actually, now that I think about it.
Only I have to say, no, I've not read Who Killed Kennedy, but there's probably not an absorber left there.
I would think there is not.
How about there was, though? How about there was?
I'm pretty sure the absorber left, that's not the right plural. The point is, I don't think they existed back in 1996, but it is nice to think so.
Overall, though, Day of the Daleks, I think, is a somewhat weaker story. It's certainly not a standout when it comes to Jon Pertwee, and James and I have mentioned before that neither one of us are particularly the biggest fans of the Third Doctor, not that we actively dislike. I mean, the Third Doctor himself is a perfectly decent Doctor, but some of his stories just aren't to our tastes. And Day of the Daleks seems weak anyway. And were it not for the Controller, again played by Aubrey Woods, I'm not sure the story would have a whole lot of interest. It's especially sort of a shame because, like James mentioned earlier, it's the first appearance of the Daleks in something like,
I think it was 5 years.
Yeah, I was going to say 4 or 5-ish years. So you sort of hope they would come back with more of a bang. But this one, that's it. I mean, the Daleks are certainly fun. Like I said, they have some decent quotes, but you can even tell the voices. They had a different voice actor. The voices are a bit weaker. They only had, I think, 3 Dalek props.
It was either 3 or 4. I've read conflicting numbers.
Yeah,
they were really banged up too.
Yeah, they didn't have that many. So, like during the fight scenes, like it just seems so small scale, which is fine. It didn't need to be like some epic battle on Gallifrey type thing like New Who might do, but it just seemed sort of on the lower end of things. Now, that said, going back to early on when we mentioned it's written by Louis Marks, I do enjoy this more than the Masque of Mandragora, but that's also not saying a whole lot because that was like a slog, and this might be more like, I don't know, something a bit better than a slog. It's not a bad story. I think it's perfectly adequate, but I'm not sure, even with Aubrey Woods' character of the Controller, I'm not sure if I can say it's that much more than adequate, to be honest.
Yeah, and I'm much in the same place. I don't know if I liked it more than the Masque of Mandragora, just because I really did like the scenery. I think the scenery is one of the things that really makes that story. And I don't know, the Controller is really... They're very, very different stories, these two. It's interesting that they're the same writer, because there's not many things between the two that I see as are that similar. The politics are completely different. But yeah, it was, I think Michael used the right word. Adequate is really the best you can say about it. Now, granted, we didn't watch the, why is it, quote unquote, special edition? What do they call it?
Yeah, the special edition with partially, it does say with partially shot sequences. So I want shots.
No, I know for a fact what they did is they made the Dalek battle look like an actual Dalek battle. I haven't seen it, but I know that they did something to actually make it look like a real Dalek battle, like what they wanted it to look like. One of those things. Kind of like when they animated the Macro Terror, they do it exactly. They did it to show what they wanted the Macro to look like, not what they actually did look like.
Yeah, which is, I guess, closer to what the creators wanted. So in a way, you could argue that theoretically the special edition should be the version we watch just because it's quote-unquote closer to the intent. And I have to imagine, life is a fleeting thing, but I have to imagine at some point I will watch a special edition like once in life. I can't say if that'll be in the next 80 years or so, but I have to imagine I'll see it once. But as far as the original version that was aired goes, it's okay, but it's not a particularly great Dalek story. Some of the politics are certainly interesting, and they certainly make the most captivating material to discuss. But I can sort of see how this one might not make a lot of people's top Pertwee stories, top Dalek stories, how it might not even make top Organ stories. It's just not a particularly great story.
Yeah, besides one really good character, most of it's basic stuff, really. It's okay at best, in my opinion. So what's coming up next, Michael?
Well, we actually alluded to this earlier, but next up is from New Who Season 1, or Series 1, should you prefer, Father's Day. Naturally, Christopher Eccleston and some Billy Piper. And Father's Day is a story that naturally both of us have seen more than once. So
I mean, yeah, I've seen it at least 5 times.
Yeah, it's a known quantity. We are quite aware of it. But that should be a fun one to rewatch anyway with the modern land. So, and I think any first series story is fun to rewatch, to be honest. Christopher Eccleston didn't get that much time, and I think it's great to spend time with what we did get from him. So yeah, next.
It always feels so strange watching the first season.
Yeah, it really does. But yeah, next up is Father's Day. So we hope that you are with us then too. Also, on a side note, should you wish, you can follow us on Twitter at Brothers Mahoney. Oh, I'm sorry, it may be Axe now. I don't know. But we're there. I mean, we're not always there, but we have a profile there. So you can follow us at Twitter. You can reach out to us below in the comments. Let us know what you thought of Day of the Daleks if you have potentially like vastly different viewpoints. But yeah, that has been our discussion on Day of the Daleks. As always, I've been Michael.
And I'm James.
We are the Brothers Mahoney, and we wish you a pleasant evening.